Hi everyone. So thank you for coming by to the first seminar organized by the QMSS Alumni Council. Today we're gonna introduce briefly about a specific topic that is the relationship between indigenous tribes, like indigenous culture and how people perceive it in the public opinion. And also we're gonna analyze the links between the indigenous culture and the centralized government and see what are the power dynamics playing between these. First of all, I'm gonna present myself. So I am John. I am a recent graduate from the QMSS program, actually from 2024, and I have a strong background in economic and statistical science. I'm looking specifically to apply quantitative methods and algorithmic analysis to more of social science and tech advancement as a means to bring more innovation to research and actually to see the small scale you can make by IA. So let's jump straight to the topic. Let's go. So first of all, before beginning with the actual topic, I would like to talk about my personal experience. So a long time ago, it was like 7 years ago, I was in Argentina because one of the members of my family is Argentinian, and she brought me to visit a specific district, or I would say a neighborhood of indigenous people called the Com. So you see, the Com are like people who come from the Indian mountains. So they call like the Indian Cardians basically, and it's like the mountains that you see in Latin America. So these people come from the mountain, and then they went to the center of Argentina to be tribes over there. The thing is that over time they suffer from marginalization, that is economic and social, and also from repeated attacks from settlers, including from people owning farms in Argentina, because you have a lot of actually farmers in Argentina and they want to expand their territories and build more houses and get more of the land. And so they just decided to attack the land of these people. Why am I saying that? It's because the neighbor I've been to was actually a place that displaced Com people went to live by. And as you can think, it was a poor place compared to a place in Argentina, like very, very poor. And you could expect that also people there had very bad memory and they just decided to write these memories on the walls. As you can see, when there's written nunca más, the nunca más means in Spanish, never again, which is similar to the systematic oppressions and violence they were suffering from the decades ago. So I've been saying a lot of these things, and I just took photography, including from the center of the camp people, in which you could actually write testaments and say about the domestic violence, or so the violence they were just suffering from us, from other people, from other groups living in Argentina. And yes, as you can see, this wasn't a very rich neighborhood at any cost. So why am I talking about the comp specifically is that I want actually to tell the difference between the indigenous culture and the actual government. So there is a difference actually in the way that by indigenous I refer to a culture that is native to a specific region of the world. I won't say country because at the time country didn't exist. People just lived in the area, on the land, and they were decentralized and they were tribes between this. There weren't any Eta nation, and like there weren't any state nation or centralized government as we know today. But what do we mean by indigenous? So according to the Cambridge Dictionary definition, it refers to people who originally lived in a place and then people who move from this place to somewhere else, basically. I do agree with the definition, but I would like to add that to me, indigenous refer to a decentralized culture, which means people who act more on belief and on a horizontal society with less hierarchy than, in a society like in the United States or any European countries. And that is to show some kind of opposition with the ethnocentric decentralized vision that much of the state nation we know today have adopted. And yes, and because they are decentralized, it also means they're going to receive less information, or I would say less public awareness on their work, on what they're doing, and they will also suffer from stigmatization and coordinated targeted attacks, which means there are a population that is very in danger when attacked by other people, basically. And the biggest systemic risk that we found among this population is about the attacks on the feminine gender. Because most of the time, when other group of individuals, or I would say centralized governments, try to attack a decentralized tribes, it's going to target women, because women, or at least the feminine gender, is the one that is able to reproduce the culture, which is one of the big issues to come more facing for a long time, which is about a practice they call the Chino, in which basically the Argentinian farmer and settlers will just come to the neighborhoods, or we say the places in which they were living, attack them, and organize collective attacks on the woman, to say it in a nice way. But yes, today I'm really focusing on analyzing the issues faced by the indigenous people, the links with the government, to try to bring more human rights treatment to the situation and see what we can do. And that is kind of the point of the KMSS, like bridging the gap between social science and quantitative methods in that way. So by indigenous cultures, I mean like all the cultures that lived in the region before settlers or colonizers would be coming. This includes like the Quechuas, which are most of us know in Peru, which have been like the main culture who built the Inca Empire in Southern America. And today they still remain a sizable big minority in Peru, but they face a lot of stigmatization and attack that we're gonna see later. On the other side, we have the Maoris, which are people who actually come from the Polynesian island and then came to New Zealand before the European or the Anglo-Saxon people would come by. And while they faced a lot of marginalization and stigmatization back in the day, now they're much better integrated than a lot of other indigenous tribes. So yeah. And so we have another one that are like the Native Americans. I can think about the Cheyennes, for instance, which are like older tribes, often semi-nomadic people that were forced to live in pockets of the former vast plain territories, starting when the European people came to the territory that is the United States back in the 17th century. So all these people share a common pattern, is that they were gradually absorbed and marginalized by a central, often outsider entity with different roots than them. And yes, they share a common pattern that is that historical, they were initially initially like the explorer, the people who came in contact with them were experts that seeks to get more of a certain material, or I would say resources from meeting with them. So initially they were like a first contact from the explorer, treaties are signed between the two parties, but over time the treaties get more favorable toward the actual settler, the explorer, and the experts start to settle in the land and start to exploit more of the resource. So in Latin America, it was often like cacao and coca leaves that were exploited by European settlers back in the day. And then over time, these European settlers wanted to get more of these resources. So they started like building range and territories and also institutions, and began also taking lands from these people and implementing more centralized institutions. And therefore, this led to the creation of colonial settlements, territory expansion through continuous attacks on native, and therefore the creation of some kind of colonial culture that were built on a little elite that was controlling like a large land with the use of weapons and systematic terrors. So some people will actually say that this version would be a little too extreme, but because like some people attempted to justify colonization, saying that back in the 15th or 16th century, like in the 16th, 17th century, that the people who come to Latin America or to other continents were doing so as a mean of Christianizing the people through Christianization. But we saw that through the various attacks that these people face in the past and also today, this isn't just true. And most of the time it was just alimented for pure economic will and ambition. So yes, because of the process of settlement, of colonization, of systematic attack, however you will say it, we still face a lot of consequences today. And it's not a surprise if most of the people with indigenous origins are facing marginalization and therefore lower economic power and lower social integration than other people within the country. And this refers mainly for the case of women. Women tend to be vastly mistreated among these communities from the outside specifically, but also it can be from the inside, but I will more focus on the outside. A lot of discriminatory practice are still taught to justify the attacks that these people are facing. Often it is through eugenist politics, saying that because these people are of colors, they should have less access to less laws or be less protected of the country rather than people who are purer in that way, and which led, unfortunately, to some kind of institutionalized racism. And so land exploitation is still very common, as I said, with the case of Chinio. And also it is very common also in Latin America, also in Peru, in Paraguay, in Ecuador. And obviously the lack of government intervention, or also the lack of available data on these populations mean that the government is actually kind of compliant with what is happening to this population. So what I decided to do is to decrypt the duration of powers between the centralized government and the decentralized indigenous people, and prioritizing on the relationship between women in all these aspects. But I want to analyze specifically what are the differences on the regional level and on the global level. Because as we see, there are like a lot of undocumented cases of systematic attacks on these indigenous people brought on the regional case. And therefore, it is important to see how the issue is treated differently, both in the region and also in the global world. So yes, I'll be focusing on the macro level and the macro and on the macro level. And on the macro level, I will build my analysis on the specific case of the Chino, which again are systematic attacks toward the COM community in Argentina, or that is toward women of colors, indigenous women, what they're facing, and try to get as much documentation as possible to see the cause and the consequence of the Chino attacks on the indigenous women in Latin America, and specifically Argentina. And also, I'm going to recover information already in the available in concrete case, organized by government and supranational institutions, to build a macro level analysis, which cares about cases with official data from the UN or from governments. And oftentimes, the most specific case, or I mean, the most well-known case about macro level would be forced sterilization that we're going to analyze in the next steps. And of course, for doing this work, I'm gonna use IA in that way. Like, I'm just gonna explain it. Why is that? Basically, when someone's gonna research on this kind of project, he or she is gonna ensure like a lot of hard tasks to do, to be cherry picking information, and can take a very, very long time to do so. The experience today is to see how IA, or I would say like the actual functions of deep search of deep learning among like artificial intelligence can help to get more information easily rather than doing it by our own. So yes, we're gonna use IA to analyze the cause of collective feminicide across on the micro and the macro level across the world. We're gonna expect, of course, that there's gonna be a lack of data and reliable information, especially on the micro level. So because indigenous tribes are often marginalized, we get very small information of them. They're not very present in big agglomeration. They lack a specific interest in the matter because people are more concerned about global interests, like forecasting the elections in the United States, or also trying to forecast what's going to be the inflation level because it's something that targets the whole population and not a specific population. And also because indigenous people tend to have a way of living that is like very different from the actual people living in cities or in centralized agglomeration in that way. The good thing is that large language models can have access to a large quantity of information, and that is because they're built in the way to to be able to retrieve and compile information easily. So we're just gonna use them to retrieve the information, synthesize it clearly and consistently, ease the work rather than doing it individually. And of course, you might expect some biases and errors, but the point right now is to ask the computer, like guide the computer into doing something rather than letting it guide us in that way. So yes, we'll be using very specific prompts and also the deep learning function to get the result we want to have. So what I'm doing is that I'm using the deep search function for ChatGPT and Cloud. Basically, I'm putting precise prompt into it and I'm following it with a case to the prompt. So like, let's say if I want to speak about Chino, he's not going to understand it. He's going to think, oh, it could be a typo. You might be like referring to people from China or to Chinese immigrants, something like that. So instead, I'm just going to write specifically that I want him to tell me about Chino and citing the source from the UN to do its search. Then he's gonna bring me a lot of source, often from high quality source using the deep learning function. And with all these source, I'm gonna ask it to build like a specific table. I would say a synthetic table with cross-validating methodologies to show that the work we're doing is actually accurate to the hypothesis we're testing. And so we're repeating and comparing the process for every country until we get satisfied with our answer. And there we go. So the table you see right there has been built entirely by ChatGPT. And as you can see, it's actually kind of precise because it's using a lot of high quality source, including governmental. So from the Argentine government and also from the government of Salta, there's a region in Argentina. Also from actual NGO like the UN and the UNICEF. And also it's hitting direct talks from people using the newspapers. And yes, we can see that based on the specific case, the practice of Chinio on the regional level at least is present in different from across all of Latin America, and it is seen as the words like collective and systematic, and also by the way that they're saying that the people, like the indigenous people suffering from these attacks are yes, like the indigenous people are basically suffering from other people that came to attack them that are not indigenous. Either it can be like white men, that is called criollo in Argentinian, criollo, or also mestizo, that are like basically people that could have had some lineage of some indigenous lineage, but also some white lineage in doing that. Or also other practices related to exorcism, which means that some of the other population decided to attack other indigenous population, and they could have been pushed by institutions or by the government of doing so. And also we're saying that for most of the case in which Chinio exists, there is a lack of information compared to Canada and Greenland, which don't have any case of Chinio in that way, and we saw more individual attacks. And actually, for both of Canada and Greenland, they actually share apologies and actually push for some recognition of these people, compared to Argentina, Peru, and Ecuador, that is still either in the NIAR or still trying to make up their mind on whenever they should create more laws or just forget about it. So yes, we can already expect from the hypothesis that based on the information we're getting, if a government has very small, has little available information for a specific case regarding specifically the Chino case, then we can expect that the government could be likely complicit in the systematic violence geared toward the indigenous tribes, and therefore leading to more marginalization in that way. On the macro level, it's a bit different, given that we have access to way more information on the macro level, especially about forestation, because it's been an issue that's been well known historically. So it has happened in Peru, in the USA, in Canada, in Sweden, but only Peru and Sweden have had actually historical case and transcript of a large-scale attack on this indigenous population, rather than the US and Canada, that tended to be more regional and target specific indigenous population rather than the whole population of indigenous in that way. And we can see that for most of the country in which forced sterilization tended to happen, is that they were recognized by their government, by the respective government, and also they started doing some work with the UN to bring acknowledgement and sometimes reparation, or at least keep talking about the topic more often to recognize more of the people. And that's the case for most of the northern countries, except Peru, because Peru is actually the most extreme case. And in the same way, it's the only government out of these four to actually be in denial about the politics they created, about the forced sterilization. And that's also the reason why the Chineo practice still happens today in Peru, because the government of Peru just refused to acknowledge the case of forced sterilization on a large scale. And by doing that, by silencing the information, you just push for more collective violence, for more stigmatization, and therefore the government just become compliant in actually creating systematic violence to the indigenous people. And as a matter of fact, in Peru, there's been at least 300 cases of forced sterilization in the span of 3 years. Yes, 300,000. That is 5% of the whole indigenous population in Peru. I am not kidding. And they're still denying about the hard prospects right now. So would I say that that the artificial intelligence helped me in doing this case? I could say yes, because in that way we just like I just managed to show that there was a difference between the micro cases and the macro cases, and we can see that the Chino phenomenon, for instance, was specific to Latin America. Like at first, I was thinking that the collective attacks on women of indigenous tribes from men of different colors were mainly found in other regions of the world, but it tends to be a very specific practice characteristic of Latin America, and perhaps because of its history of colonization and the fact that the whole region has been subject to a lot of subjugation and a lot of marginalization from the European settlers starting from the 16th century. And we can see that obviously the lack of information available tends to be equal to a government that is complicit with systematic attack on the population and on the indigenous tribes. So I would say this is some form of censorship. And when the government acts as a censor and doesn't want to be transparent, it is when it actually lets systematic violence to happen regularly over and over and over. Obviously, the scale is changing because a government like Canada that actually recognized what was happening with forced sterilization and with attacks on indigenous tribes has actually experienced a much lower rate of forced sterilization case rather than Peru, which is in total denial about what it did and still says that it was doing this politics as a way to reduce poverty, which is obviously just force. And yes, the response tend also to vary, but most of the governments that tend to be transparent and show information at least show some kind of acknowledgement toward the indigenous population and reparation, and they accept and they draft law so these people could become more integrated and less marginalized into society. And obviously, global organization like the UN still plays a crucial role in defending the rights of the indigenous people. So yes, I would say that the hypothesis could be confirmed in some way that a government limiting indigenous data enable violence perpetuation and speculation in no matter cost. And this is seen when there is a complexity in silencing systematic attack documentation. Also, when the quality source accessible from AI are poor quality or poorly available, which means that there is still a continuous practice about non-recognition of collective violence in this government and therefore more systematic oppression. And the actual government that did recognize the systematic attack on the indigenous people actually managed to better integrate the indigenous people in their country or in society, but they still face, of course, common issues as much as other minorities, including racism or misogyny, which is very common in any patriarchy society as we know today. Anyway, there is obviously some problem with our artificial intelligence, and one of the big limits are qualitative and quantitative. So qualitatively is that artificial intelligence, especially today compared to a year ago, tend to be hallucinating a lot, and they're gonna give you a lot of false information only to please you, basically. So you're gonna receive response that just doesn't make sense, response that are like out of the context totally, response that come from source picked from very original source like Reddit, for instance, or also minimal critical reflection. So yes, in that kind of work, you just gotta tell the AI what it is doing, and you're not gonna let the artificial intelligence or the chatbot to tell you what it wants you to do, basically. And obviously, you have a lot of quantitative errors that is about overfitting because the model can just use the same practice over and over and over, and just gonna return you information or data that is totally false or doesn't make sense with your hypothesis. Skewed distribution in the way that because the large language model is built that way, it wants to only show you some specific information, and it's not going to show you information that it doesn't want to show you, because ChatGPT, as much as Cloud, are designed by big enterprise, by corporation, and they just want you to listen to what they have written in their framework, or at least in their elegance in that way, sampling biases, and of course, lack of statistical interference. But this is more complicated in the case of indigenous research, given that we're lacking a lot of statistics and also of data available on indigenous people. And this led to much less quantitative methods to be applied to analyze the problem or to test analysis or to test like the hypothesis using statistical analysis, unfortunately. Anyway, would I recommend using artificial intelligence as a way to do research? I would say yes, but to some extent. So yes, through the work I was doing, and thanks to deep learning, I was able to get sufficient information from high reliable source to build my analysis and to show you the true reality of what these indigenous people were facing. But if it was the case in an academic research and in actually a very serious work, I would just say no, basically, because again, artificial intelligence tend to be always biased, and they will always guide and give information properly to the compliant laws they learn. They're always gonna return the content that it's gonna please you like any other algorithm will do, basically. And you can just tell it by the screenshot I took with Cloud, basically. I just asked him to change the format. If he could make it more into a a PowerPoint format, and just I said yes, and instead when I asked him to do it, he said yes with a strong recommendation, which was not what I was asking him to do. So no, Claude was just hallucinating, and that wasn't the point of my response. So what I would recommend in the meantime was just cherry picking the viable source via archive access. Like for any PhD students or people still at university right now, the best thing was just to have access to university and pick the information from the source available within your university, but not to use actually artificial intelligence to do it for yourself, because it's just gonna ruin your paper in any time. So in that way, okay, I said that yes, I actually enjoyed using artificial intelligence to build my program and get as much information as possible. But now I'm saying it's not a good thing to do. So what would be my solution for artificial intelligence? This one. How about we just build like an artificial intelligence that acts like as a universal library, or at least like some kind of open source model that is not defined by specific practice, but that is available to everyone and that is not influenced neither by anyone. And in that case, I'm thinking about a specific example, like any big library, like the one in Alexandria, that basically had a lot of archive and information and art. And basically, people will just get there, like get the information and leave it back in the library. And to me, that's how a universal AI should work. Basically, you just ask him to a request. He's just gonna show you all the specific information available on the database, and all this database is information, specifically objective information from well-known source, from academic source, or from historical accounts that can be used for your analysis. And yes, these are ideas of ideas. You as a prompt, you just ask the topic you want to have. It's gonna show you the target thing to search on the specific topic, along with the methodologies. It's gonna also give you a score for the data quality. Then it's gonna compile all the data into a specific table or an aggregated schema, and then finally validates all the information you got with the hypothesis you're getting. That would be, to me, the ideal artificial intelligence model I would like to have if we ever have to use artificial intelligence ready in terms of academic research. And yes, to finish this seminar, I just would like to end up the seminar with a quote from actually some kind of elder, that truth is the foundation of our life. Without truth, we are not free, and this is true sovereignty of all individual. And finally, yes, technologies can also improve the lives of many people, including from indigenous people, because not only can raise public awareness for what these people are facing and for the constant stigmatization and constant systematic attack these people have been facing for now decades and centuries, but also we can enable these people to have access to projects and have themselves be becoming more implemented towards society. And I just wanted to finish the presentation with basically how some Aboriginal women were able to create a mindfulness app in language, which was able to not only give them access to society in some way, to the technological society that we're living in, but also to bring some of the knowledge and some of the customs to our culture, which is something that we're lacking today, especially in the current political era. Thank you.